Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Policy Initiatives Catalog and Roadmap Kickoff call. Today, we will be discussing to our stakeholders a timeline of proposing new policy initiatives and a preview to the catalog submission template that has been made available after this call. As well, we have a few other items that we'll be discussing. We will cover those really soon. I definitely want to appreciate Alyssa Craig Arnold, who's our Senior Policy Integration and Governance Specialist, Market Strategy and Governance, and Amelia Blanky, our Principal Economist and Director for Market Strategy and Governance, who's here today. We also have two other presenters here today, Danielle Mills and also Mark Richardson, who's our manager for the stakeholder engagement. And then we will go ahead and get started, as this call is being recorded for informational and community purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. If you have any questions during the meeting, you will be able to ask them through the verbal chat or in the queue. We utilize the raise hand icon that's located on the bottom toolbar. As well, you're able to dial it into the phone line for star 3. We also invite our presenters and speakers to make sure you state your full name and affiliation, so before speaking, so we can know who's speaking. And then during the verbal chat questions, you could also provide that as well. We'll be monitoring chat questions by event producer Silas, who will be here assisting us in today's meeting. And then we also have a few items that we're covering. The next slide will kind of kick off with Alyssa and Amelia, and then we'll kind of invite Danielle and Mark back to review some few slides and topics for today's meeting. But at this time, I will give the floor to Amelia and Alyssa so they can go ahead and provide a few updates for today's kickoff call.
Thank you, Brenda. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the annual Policy Initiatives and Catalog Roadmap process for 2025. I think, as most of you are very aware, this is a relatively new process. This is the second year of our more formally stakeholder-driven, stakeholder-submitted initiative catalog and roadmap. This process is incredibly dependent on the participation and the meaningful participation of stakeholders. So we are very grateful for all of you who are here today. And I want to call out particularly the contribution of the Regional Issues Forum, or the RIF. The Regional Issues Forum will be holding a workshop on this in early April, I believe April 8th. With that, I want to say this is the second year. If you do have, we are making a few changes to the process this year. I think marginal improvements based on our experience during the first year of running this in 2024. If you do have suggestions or ideas for ways that we could make this process either more efficient, easier to use, anything else, we would very much appreciate hearing those on either this call or if you want to follow up in written comments afterwards. With that, I will hand it off to Alyssa to walk you through the changes we're making this year.
Thanks, Amelia. And thank you to everyone for joining this afternoon. We're looking forward to working with all of you on the 2025 Policy Catalog and Roadmap. So the purpose of the call today here is to kick off the 2025 process for developing the catalog and the roadmap. And we're really going to preview what that process is going to look like, particularly in terms of opportunities for stakeholder engagement and what the timeline for that looks like. And specifically, we're going to break down what kind of submissions are going to be considered within the catalog process, what kinds of submissions and requests should be considered and submitted outside of the catalog process through other existing ISO processes. And then, like Amelia mentioned, the meeting is also an opportunity for you to ask any questions about this year's process or potentially provide some feedback. We'd like to kind of review what the process is going to look like up front and then take questions at the end of the hour. So I'm going to start with kind of just a level set on the two main products that we're developing through our annual process here. First is the Policy Initiatives Catalog. The catalog is a document that synthesizes the stakeholder and the Regional Issue Forum priorities among all of these stakeholder submissions of potential policy initiatives that will be submitted over the next month. It's a descriptive document, so what's published in the catalog is driven by stakeholder feedback, stakeholder input, and I'll be speaking a little bit more about what this process looks like in later slides. But like Amelia mentioned, it does not work without stakeholder participation, starting with the initial submissions and the prioritization process. And that final catalog product is really a reflection of what we get from stakeholders. So we really want to encourage everyone here to participate in that process by either submitting proposals over the next month or providing feedback on those priorities. The catalog serves as one of the inputs to the policy initiatives roadmap. The roadmap is the ISO's work plan for policy initiatives, and it describes the initiatives that the ISO plans to take on over the next 3 years. And we developed the roadmap by first incorporating the stakeholder priorities that were identified in the catalog, and then we consider those alongside the ISO strategic objectives, as well as factors like feasibility, urgency, ISO financial and staff resources, as well as, ISO resources. And the roadmap includes both the initiatives or potential initiatives that were submitted by stakeholders through the catalog process, as well as some issues that the ISO identifies itself. Next slide, please. I'm just going to review some goals for the policy catalog and roadmap. Overall, it's really to bring external stakeholders into the ISO's planning and prioritization process for policy initiatives. And that's where we start the process with a focus on stakeholder submissions and prioritization during the first half of the year. And we want to be transparent. So part of that is kind of updating the process like we did starting in 2024 to make it a more predictable process every year. So everyone, all the stakeholders can know when and where they can submit potential discretionary policy initiatives, as well as what the other available venues are for items that don't fall into that category. And then the goal is also for all of these discussions and submissions to take place in a public forum to really level the playing field in terms of access to information, access to the ISO, any information that might be helpful in identifying priorities. And then finally, it gives stakeholder prioritization a more defined role in developing the roadmap. Like I mentioned, it's not the only consideration in the roadmap. What ends up on the roadmap needs to align with ISO strategic goals and resources. And we assess projects based on our understanding of their impact to market efficiency and system reliability, but it is a critical input to the roadmap. And that's why stakeholder input happens kind of in the first half of the year to inform that roadmap development. Next slide, please. Okay, next I want to review the actual timeline and action items for some of the stakeholder participation this year. So we've color-coded this into external processes and internal processes. In orange are the points of external stakeholder engagement. That's where the ISO is solicited submissions and feedback and information from stakeholders. So I'm just going to review this really briefly, and then I'll go into some more detail in a later slide. But we're starting with the discretionary policy initiative submission window. That opens today and extends through the month of February. And we just want to emphasize that this is a single annual opportunity in 2025 for stakeholders to submit items to the catalog. And again, I'll kind of review what that submission process looks like in the next slide. And then in March and April, we plan to hold a series of focus groups or working groups for stakeholders to present on their submissions from February. And then we'll also have a regional issues forum roundtable, and that's where they'll be discussing and prioritizing those submissions. And then in May, stakeholders are going to be able to do kind of an indicative voting exercise based on their prioritization of those submissions that were presented on in March and April. And then from there, in green, from July through about December, the ISO starts that internal prioritization process. And the goal there is to produce the final roadmap that will be published in December. Next slide, please. So just backing up a bit, like I mentioned in the last slide, we are releasing the template for submitting potential discretionary policy initiatives today. and the submission window for that extends through the last day of February. Like last year, it's in the format of a comment template on the ISO website. If you provided comments on a policy initiative before this, you'll be familiar with that template, but it's a web-based submission page. We will be requesting essentially some information as last year. So that's a description of the issue that you're seeking to address, description of the initiative that you'd like to potentially see address that issue, and then whatever insight you can provide into the market impact of that issue and that initiative, the timing and urgency, and then the data availability or necessary data for this analysis. I do just want to note that submissions are public and will be published on the Catalog and Roadmap webpage. So just note that if you do submit that, it'll be posted. Next slide, please.
Alyssa, also to add on, I provided a link on the chat. Stakeholders also have 3 entries to submit per submission template. We want to make sure you cover that as well.
Yes, thank you, Brenda. Yeah, you can submit 3 potential policy initiatives, and then you can reach out to us if you need additional room for that. Okay, next I want to expand a bit more on the points of stakeholder engagement this spring and early summer. I already kind of reviewed the stakeholder submission template. So starting with the stakeholder focus or working groups, in March and April, we'll be holding a series of working groups. How many exactly depends on the number of submissions we receive. But those are just an opportunity for stakeholders to present on their own submissions to their fellow stakeholders. And the goal here is getting at that transparency principle, so giving everyone kind of an opportunity to get on a level playing field in terms of clarifying proposals, asking questions, kind of preparing for that ranking and prioritizing of those proposals in May. The Regional Issues Forum Roundtable Workshop will also be held during this period, and the RIF for that is going to meet. Sector liaisons will kind of synthesize their priorities among sectors and compile feedback from their members. And then like last year, after we wrap up those stakeholder groups, we will give all stakeholders the opportunity to kind of do essentially an indicative voting exercise and identify their highest priority initiatives among those submitted, and then characterize their level of support for the remaining initiatives. So support, neutral, oppose for all of those initiatives. And after that, the ISO will take the results of that survey, release the catalog, which kind of just synthesizes and identifies what the highest priority initiatives are based on that stakeholder feedback and who supports or opposes all of those initiatives. And like I mentioned, from there, the ISO kind of starts that internal prioritization process in July, and that ultimately results in the roadmap that we publish by the end of the year. Next slide, please. Next, I want to spend a little bit of time just kind of speaking through categorizing potential submissions for the catalog and roadmap, and what the venues are for non-initiative items that stakeholders would like to request that the ISO consider. And for that, I'll have Danielle Mills speak about the infrastructure-related policy proposals, and then Mark Richardson speak about enhancements and process improvement-related topics. So goal here is just to provide a little bit more clarity about what exactly is being considered for inclusion in the catalog and for the roadmap. And just want to make sure that stakeholders that do have feedback for the ISO are kind of aware of those other different venues where we consider stakeholder feedback outside of the catalog and outside of the roadmap. I think we can respond a little bit more effectively and efficiently when stakeholder feedback is submitted in the right venue. So just want to provide some clarity there. Starting at the top, catalog and roadmap are really intended for a fairly narrow set of proposals, and those are stakeholder submissions for discretionary market design initiatives. So those are potential changes that impact market design. Those would require a tariff change, and then subsequently must go through the policy initiative stakeholder process. So scoping out the initiative, developing policy proposals, and then going to the board or the WEM governing body for a decision. And discretionary is just means that it's something that's not mandatory, so something that's an initiative, that's something like a response to a FERC order or other regulatory requirement. Kind of speaking through topics that are not within the scope of the catalog and roadmap. I think starting with topics that are being addressed in a current initiative or a current working group. Those are not candidates for the catalog. So we do have 3 new initiatives starting this year. We have the Congestion Revenue Rights Initiative, CRRs, the Storage Design and Modeling Initiative, and then the Demand and Distributed Energy Market Integration Initiative, formerly known as the DRDR Initiative. So these are all starting this winter with working groups, kind of just in the early part of the year, starting off to develop the scope of those initiatives. And I just want to note that any potential submissions related to those topics should be brought up in those working groups. That's where those discussions are taking place about potential scope. And, you know, the catalog lags those working groups, so it's not going to be the venue for those submissions. Second, as I believe Danielle will be speaking to, infrastructure planning related items are addressed in the transmission planning process or the interconnection process enhancements initiatives. So those also do not take place in the catalog and roadmap process. And then Mark will also speak to the correct venues for the kind of process improvements, general enhancement requests that do not require a policy initiative and do not require a tariff change. So I just kind of want to emphasize here that the goal here is just to provide a more efficient response to stakeholder feedback. We want to direct those submissions to the correct ISO venue. And then a change from last year. Last year, we tried to follow up with stakeholder submissions that were not considered policy initiatives, kind of through the course of the year, and give a disposition of a lot of those submissions where possible at the end of the year with the roadmap. That's, I think, we found a less efficient way to kind of assess these submissions and slows down the roadmap development process. So for 2025, any submissions that we receive that are not discretionary policy initiatives are going to be directed to the relevant internal process or ISO team, and then we will not continue tracking these submissions through the rest of the catalog and roadmap process. So that's a quick summary of, you know, hopefully what belongs in the catalog, what the alternative venues are for items that do not belong in the catalog. And if we've got Danielle on the line, I would like to turn it over to her to talk through the infrastructure-related policy. Yes, Amelia.
I think Amelia go first, yeah.
Before we switch over to Danielle, I just wanted to point out in the chat the correct date for the RIF roundtables, April 9th. There's a link in the chat to information on the RIF webpage about that. I'll also note that if you are not a current participant in the Regional Issues Forum, there is guidance on the RIF webpage about sectors. So that will help you identify the correct sector, and then you can be part of the Regional Issues Forum as well. With that, I'll hand it off to Danielle. Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks, Amelia and Alyssa. So if we go to the next slide, I can walk through how we'll be addressing some new infrastructure-related policy suggestions. And that is that we do intend to take those issues up in current and ongoing, in some cases, recurring policy initiatives. So right now, you know, as many of you know, we have the ongoing annual transmission planning process, which is a 15-month cycle. We're toward the end of the 2024-2025 transmission planning process. So that in that draft plan will provide sort of a policy overview of some issues that we've explored in the policy space over the last year, but really the best place to bring new policy suggestions or concepts is to the 2025-2026 transmission planning process. There will be a meeting in late February to kind of kick off that initiative and address the draft study plan. So that's a good time to bring any new ideas about changes to the transmission planning process to the ISO. I also want to flag that we will, we have to comply with FERC Order 1920, which will necessitate some changes to our transmission planning process. We do plan to have a stakeholder meeting in March to update everyone on the status of our compliance plan around Order 1920. But again, the best place to bring new policy ideas and concepts around transmission planning is to the 2025-2026 transmission planning process. To the extent that you have suggestions for interconnection, many of you know that we have very regularly recurring and ongoing interconnection process enhancements initiatives. We're currently on the third track of IPE 2023, and that is to be resolved in March, but we do plan to open a whole new interconnection process enhancements initiative beginning later in 2025 once we resolve track 3. And that will take place to make any necessary changes to our interconnection process before we open cluster 16. So this is a place where we've already committed to opening this initiative to talk through any necessary changes after seeing the results of the recent reforms for track 2 of the interconnection process enhancements as they relate to cluster 15. So there will be multiple opportunities to bring us new ideas for transmission planning and interconnection. If you have policy suggestions that you feel or that you want to propose that we feel are neither appropriate in the transmission planning process nor the IPE initiative, we will consider opening a new stakeholder initiative around those ideas. But I think for now, those are the two kind of general categories of infrastructure-related policy issues that we can suggest that you bring any new suggestions to.
Thank you, Danielle. And I also went ahead and added those links for those folks following the reoccurring process of 2025-2026 here on the chat, and also the IPE. So they can also see those those upcoming milestones for each initiative when they visit this link.
Thanks, Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda. Thank you, Danielle. I'm going to now turn it over to Mark Richardson, and he's going to talk through process improvements and enhancements.
Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa. And just to confirm, you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Happy New Year. My name is Mark Richardson. I am the Manager of Customer Experience and Account Management. My team kind of supports the day-to-day level transactions as well as kind of helps support the policy team from a strategic and initiative perspective. Throughout the course of business, we do get process improvements and enhancement requests. What is an enhancement request? At a very high level, hey, I'm using this application instead of the color being blue, we would like the color to be purple, right, to keep it extremely simplified version of an example. Or there might be process improvements. Hey, when you guys are working through this associated process, it'd be nice if you added this in that official process, right? So we get all types of requests that we've kind of coined process improvements and enhancements. Now, as you're well aware, due to the large amount of stakeholders and market participants in the industry, there's a ton of requests coming in. So how do we manage those? So what we do at a high level, all enhancements and process improvements are assessed, and based on their level of impact to the broader market and associated feasibility from a technical perspective, that kind of helps drive what initiative or what project, what release does it make sense best to put that effort in. And then to the extent there's a heavy return on investment and it's good for the broader community, from a prioritization perspective, that's when the decision is made as, okay, that's something we're going to be able to commit to here in 2025, something in 2026, or based on everything going on, looking at the big picture of current efforts, this is going to be delayed until further notice, right? Updates on these are typically provided in the release user group, technical user group, and potentially the market sim forms, depending on whether or not they're going to be going forward with, or they would be responded to directly based on the submitter of that request with the official response from the California ISO as to how we're going to proceed. Next slide, please. So with all that said, we are working on a new tool. This has actually been in the development phase for a little while now, but we definitely recognize the opportunity to maximize transparency of these enhancement requests. And what I mean by that is, let's say one organization going back to my very simplified version of, hey, instead of the screen being blue, we want it purple, or maybe we want to see this type of data in this report in OASIS, to avoid duplication of efforts and things like that. The goal here would be to make all enhancement requests, all process improvement requests available for everyone to see. And that's exactly what this new tool is going to do, right? It's going to provide that greater visibility, not only to the market participants, but to our broader group of customers, which are and includes regulatory bodies, government agencies, associations, advocacy groups, and the general public. Now, this new tool is separate from our City application, which is our Salesforce platform that we use to kind of manage those day-to-day transaction inquiries. Does not require passwords or accounts. It's not going to be certificate-driven, so it's going to be truly a public-facing tool that will allow individuals to come in and see what the existing requests are, allow you to weigh in on those associated priorities, how important it is to the community, allow you to comment and weigh in on, yes, that makes sense, no, that doesn't make sense, maybe instead of blue, it should be green, and here's why, providing those associated justifications and things of that nature. Once this tool is ready for prime time, we'll be definitely rolling that out to the community through the appropriate forms, and we hope to provide an update by the end of Q2 this year. Next slide, please. So absent that new tool, what to do today, right? And there's really two avenues, right? We have an avenue for scheduling coordinators who do have the use of and access of the City ticket system. These enhancement requests can be made today. So what all you got to do is submit that City ticket with an enhancement request in the subject line. And then in the description field, we ask that you provide the following information, right? What application name and or process are you looking to enhance? Provide a very detailed description of that request. Why? Explain the purpose of the request. Why is it needed? Who benefits from this? Is it something that maybe only a supplier would benefit from, or maybe only, a data miner if you're a developer? Provide that level of impact, that return on investment that it would be for your organization to have this request, and then, signify whether or not there's a potential reliability impact or it helps enhance reliability of the overall grid. Next slide, please. Now, these are for all the other participants that don't have access to the City ticket system, right? Going back to the regulator bodies, government agencies, associations, associated advocacy groups, and the general public. So out on our website under the About tab, there's a Contact Us option. That submits a City ticket internally to my group, right? So today, there's a subject line that has a drop-down that we're working on adding the enhancement request to now. You should see that here in the next day or two. And then again, all we need then is same level of information from a description perspective, but here I wanted to add, please add what organization you represent so that we have the, we know which angle you're coming at when reviewing that request. That is all I had, Alyssa.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that update. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And just wrap up with a quick summary of next steps if you're planning to be involved in the catalog development over the next few months. So like I mentioned, catalog submissions are opening up today, accepting those through the end of February. We do not have dates yet, but we will be holding prioritization workshops for stakeholders to present on their submissions in March and April, and then follow that with the submission of prioritization rankings in May. And again, over the next few months is really where we're hoping to see that stakeholder participation, since the catalog and prioritization is really a major input into the roadmap and the primary way that stakeholders can be involved in that process. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm seeing some chat that we might have some questions here potentially for Mark. So I'd like to open up the floor for any questions.
Yeah, no, appreciate it, Alyssa, and I appreciate you walking through this last slide. So there was a question posed in the chat regarding, how are these enhancements prioritized? I think it's a fantastic question, and apologies I wasn't clear on my previous slides. So in short, depending on the associated level of impact to your organization, financial reliability, and weighing the associated IT feasibility of it, ensuring that there's no tariff implications, there's no existing policy implications of this enhancement. That enhancement is then reviewed internally by all the associated impacted business units and then determine where best to put that from a priority perspective, like where does it make sense to fit in, what existing efforts are going on, does it warrant a higher level priority than a existing item that's already in flight. All those things are weighed, and then any update to that enhancement would be provided in the associated form. I hope that answers your question, Allie. Thank you.
I'll just say, if you'd like to ask a question, please press the raise hand or #3. And also, as a reminder, the enhancement that Mark Richardson just spoke to is something that would be open on a regular basis. The February opportunity is for submissions to the policy and the discretionary initiative and policy roadmap process. And you can, of course, participate in all of the ISO's open initiatives on an ongoing basis.
Thank you, Amelia. And to add, we plan to provide a notice next week. So for folks that weren't able to make this call, that recording will be also made available early next week with a notice with the upcoming submission deadline of February 28th. So that way we can kind of have more submissions and make sure those submissions are submitted timely through the commenting template. So I don't see any questions other than the queue. I think from the previous chats we got, the most important one was that the RIF meeting is being held on April 9th, as Amelia mentioned. So that link is also provided there, and also a few links to the other working groups. So the 3 new working groups, the congestion revenue rights, the demand and distributed energy market integration, and the storage modeling and design, are also available through the links that we have here provided. So those ones are kicking off. And so far, most of those have their first 2-3 meetings. So make sure you follow those on the website as well. And I do see another question, Amelia.
Yeah, I'll take the question in the chat. The question in the chat is, how does this process intersect with the Western Regional Organization being discussed as part of the Pathways Initiative? Good question. I will say that this process is the California ISO's process under the current governance. I think in some ways you can see that the changes are in some ways anticipating what the future might look like under a new regional organization, but that is not the environment in which we exist for 2025. So we're anticipating some of those changes, looking forward to some of those changes, and looking for any suggestions or insight that any of you may have on changes that we should make moving forward for 2026 in anticipation of changes that do come with the changes in governance as we move between the different steps in the Pathways process.
Brenda, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mark. I don't see any other questions in queue, but we are monitoring the chats, and so far, great questions. I think for now, if anyone has a question from this meeting that's kind of specific to the recording or anything we provide in this meeting, you can always send us an email to ISO stakeholderaffairs@kaiser.com. But definitely go ahead and check out that comment template. We do have one specific question on the very top that might help also kind of get some feedback from our stakeholders for the process catalog as well.
And with that, I think thank you all very much for your time. Nobody ever minds ending a meeting early, so we can wrap up.
Yes, let's go ahead and wrap up. As a reminder, this call is being recorded. We also have this process webpage where we make that recording available early next week, as well as these 2 links that are helpful for those folks that were following us in 2024, as well as the final 2024 roadmap and the final 2024 catalog. But any questions, feel free to send them over. And then lastly, but not least, we do have the Energy Blog Matters that just posted recently to the ISO, a new social media platform that the communications team at the ISO is utilizing for today is Blue Sky, and it's also very user-friendly. We plan to utilize it as well for the California ISO account and the Flex Alert. So this is just to engage our audience about any related issues across the grid. And also this does not replace any existing platforms. So we are still going to continue using X, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn through the California ISO for any updates. So thanks so much, everyone, and I hope everyone has a great day and stay safe. And we can go ahead and close our call.